While there are many reportedly haunted hotels in Texas, this one seems to top many lists for the most ghostly activity. Most of this seems to stem from the very chilling stories of room 525. In the 1880s, there was a young couple that was having their wedding at the hotel, or at least that was the plan. The groom got cold feet and left the bride at the altar. Now, heartbroken, she ran upstairs to their suite, room 525, and took her own life. And it said she still walks the halls in her long white gown. But that isn't the end of the story, because in 1991, another bride was spurned at the altar, and after going on a shopping spree with the groom's stolen credit card, she too returned to room 525 and took her own life. Since then, guests have seen her carrying a pistol and walking into the room, all without ever opening the door. So don't stay in room 525 or you may never check out. There's also an eerie painting that's said to be inhabited by the spirit of a young girl, the daughter of a senator, whose expression seems to change on its own. People who view the painting have said that they feel like they were floating off of the ground, though they remained on the floor. They also say that their equilibrium and balance was off for a few hours after looking at her. Number 9. USS Lexington, Corpus Christi. Now before I tell you about this spooky ship, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you can catch all of our amazing videos. As a naval vessel that saw actual battle, there have been multiple lives that were lost on board, including that of an engine room operator who still roams the ship at night waiting for the battle to end. The crew of the ship have often reported flickering lights and doors slamming on their own, which, given that this is a very well-maintained historical site, you'd think that they would have found the cause by now. Maybe it's just the ghosts of sailors lost to time. Coming in at number 8, we have the Marfa Lights in, you guessed it, the town of Marfa. While there is so much beauty in the area and plenty of non-spooky reasons to visit, the main tourist attraction to this quaint little town are floating, sourceless lights that seem to change color and even move in the night sky. Many visitors make the journey at all times of year to see the lights, and there's even a yearly festival made in their honor. Reported since 1883 by people of all ages and professions, no one knows what these floating orbs are. They appear at random, but usually in the same area of the sky, and since there's so much open space and low light pollution, it's perfect for stargazing, or seeing spooky orbs, I guess. Some say that these lights are UFOs, some say spirits, and others think that they're just headlights. All that I know is that if I see a mysterious floating orb, I'm going the other way. Number 7. Woman Hollering Creek, San Antonio. Said to be the home of La Llorona, or the Weeping Woman, this creepy creek leaves anyone who visits with a sense of dread. As the story goes, La Llorona was a woman who was distraught that her once doting, affectionate husband left her for another woman. And after confronting him and leaving the confrontation with cuts and bruises, she waded into the water, dressed in her best clothes, and drowned herself in the creek, right after doing the same to the rest of her family. Her chilling screams for her children can be heard all the way from the highway, giving her and the creek its very apt name. Many people have felt themselves being drawn towards the water by ghostly voices, and some have even been tugged towards the bank of the creek. Perhaps it's La Llorona looking for her next victim. The screams heard and feelings of being pulled into the water have mostly been reported by younger people, making this all the more terrifying given what La Llorona did. Number 6. El Paso High School. Now, when you're thinking of haunted places, a school isn't exactly the first place that comes to mind, but this one has quite a story. In 1985, the graduating class received their yearbooks, and when basking in the nostalgia of their group photo, they noticed something odd. A woman who no one could identify was in the picture with them. Now, obviously, that would be quite concerning. I know I'd be freaked out if there was someone I'd never seen before standing next to me in a picture. The blurry apparition still has not been identified to this day, but some think it's a student who fell from a window years before who never got to graduate. I say give her the diploma. She's already in the yearbook. Sticking in El Paso, in our number 5 spot is the Plaza Theater Performing Arts Center. As someone who loves the theater, I try to see as many shows as I can, but I think I'll skip visiting this theater, no matter how good the production is. Built in 1930 as a movie house, demolished for a parking lot in the late 80s, and rebuilt as a live theater space, this building has seen many changes, but some things have stayed constant throughout its history. Many workers of the building have reported seeing a man in one of the box seats, in a tuxedo, smoking a cigarette. One crew member recalls seeing him after turning on the stage lights, sitting alone in the box, as though he'd been there for hours already before the lights came on. And when she saw the smoking man, he turned to her and said, "We all have our time to die," and then threw himself headfirst over the balcony, vanishing before he could hit the ground. A former vice president of the theater also recalls seeing a ghostly girl bouncing a ball in the aisles of the theater and always staring. He also noticed that there was a rag doll that seemed to appear and disappear on its own, moving to locations that it couldn't have without someone's help. Even locked doors didn't seem to stop it from appearing in the projection booth. Number 4. Yorktown Memorial Hospital. Established in 1951, this abandoned hospital has been named one of the most haunted places in America. And since over 2,000 patients are said to have died within its walls before it shuttered its doors in 1992, I can see why. Reports of apparitions of people in hospital gowns running through the corridors or hiding in rooms are numerous, along with moving wheelchairs, disembodied voices, and footsteps. But there are some who have even more chilling stories. While exploring the halls and rooms that have remained largely untouched since its closure, some ghost hunters have been touched, had their clothes tugged on, or even pushed to the ground while being given a ghostly warning. Some of the spirits are believed to be that of patients who had illegal medical experiments performed on them and lost their lives in the process, making for a very vengeful ghost. Number 3. The Screaming Bridge in Arlington. On the night of February 4th, 1961, 6 from the local high school were taking a drive after seeing a movie earlier in the evening. While driving down Bedford Road toward the rail crossing bridge, which had mysteriously been burned down a few years previous, only rebuilt earlier that year, they were startled by another car reversing and honking its horn wildly. This caused the driver to speed up out of fear, and not realizing that the bridge was out, the car careened over the edge and crashed into the other side of the ravine. Unfortunately, 3 of them lost their lives that night, and their screams of terror can still be heard by anyone traveling the renamed Greenbelt Road. The saddest part of this story is that the car that startled them was being driven by a man who had just barely avoided going over the edge of the broken bridge himself, and he was reversing and honking to warn them of the danger ahead. The entire area, now known as Death Crossing, is now blocked off and no traffic travels through. At number 2 on our list, we have La Carafe in Houston. This historic bar, built originally as a bakery in 1860, has been serving patrons for decades, but many come not only for the drinks, but for a paranormal experience. Bartenders and visitors alike have seen apparitions of a hulking man walking upstairs and hearing his giant footsteps pacing the floor. No one knows who this may be, but some say he died there from some nefarious means. The former manager of the bar can also be seen staring out of the top floor window, looking over his patrons and ensuring they're having a good time. And he seems a bit more friendly. However, there are some that report the sounds of a body being dragged across the floor above, but when the sound is followed, nothing's there. Makes you wonder what happened upstairs. And since it's one of the oldest buildings in the city that's been in continuous use, it's become a tourist hotspot and a historical site. Personally, I won't be stopping in for a drink anytime soon, no matter how good the cocktails are. And finally, number 1, the Alamo. While students are taught to remember the Alamo, they don't really teach about all of the spirits who can never forget. In the infamous battle, thousands of soldiers lost their lives, and many were dumped into mass graves and others left to rot out in the sun, so it makes sense that you'd have some pissed off ghosts wandering the ground. There have been countless reports of soldier apparitions walking with weapons in hand, taking their usual patrol, and even full platoons screaming and charging into battle. Even in the afterlife they couldn't get away from war, and so they continue to fight their invisible enemy. There are also accounts of a small blonde-haired boy hiding in multiple places where the gift shop now stands, so make sure to pick up your haunted keychains. While the buildings are beautiful to look at and the area is interesting to explore, the history can leave one with a haunting feeling, and with all those spirits around, I'd be careful touring here.
Number 10. Nakagasuku Hotel. In 1975, a World Fair was planned to be held on the island of Okinawa, commemorating the American return of the island to Japan 3 years prior. Located on the Motobu Peninsula, this was a high-profile event to be sure, and one businessman from the capital of Naha saw a great opportunity for profit. The businessman chose to build the hotel with an excellent view of the Pacific Ocean and East Chinese Sea, and, however, construction was immediately hindered by warnings from monks that the land they were building on was supposedly the home to a great deal of sacred locations and burial grounds. These warnings were ignored, but as accidents accidents during construction began to increase, progress was halted as the workers began to fear that the build itself was cursed. In an attempt to encourage the workers to return to their jobs, the businessman made a show of living on the premises until the project was finished. 3 nights later, the man lost his mind and disappeared. Do you think that you could stay for more than 3 days? It's pretty beautiful, so long as you don't mind the angry ghosts and demons. Number 10. The Lizzie Borden House. A bed and breakfast located at 232nd Street is home to one of America's most haunted and mysterious homes. The Lizzie Borden House gets its reputation from the unsolved murder of Lizzie Borden in 1892. She's one of the most infamous true crime figures, known for killing her father and stepmother with a hatchet. There's a twisted rhyme about this incident, but I'm not gonna sing it here. I'm not getting cursed on YouTube. So on August 4th, 1892, Lizzie's stepmother of 27 years was struck 19 times while her father, Andrew, was hit 11. Although Lizzie Borden was acquitted and found not guilty, the dark history draws in crowds every night for its nightly tour of the premises. The Lizzie Borden room, the infamous room where these horrors took place, is requested the most for paranormal overnighters. Some 1408 stuff. Would you do this? Who does this? And it's not like you can just, enjoy a lovely all-inclusive breakfast, but there's also the nightly house ghost tour, the ghost hunt, and all of that, which attracts fans of horrors every night of the year. Number 8. The Chu Mansion. When Chu Jinshan and Chu Weiqing moved to Shanghai, they did what anyone would do with a suddenly gained fortune. Built a big old house smack dab in the middle of Shanghai and threw a bunch of animals inside. And not just any old animals, they kept tigers, crocodiles, and peacocks on the property, building a massive garden for their captive creatures to prowl. Their decadence was unmatched in the entire city, which makes their sudden disappearance all the more mysterious. The animals were sold off or eaten, and half of the mansion was converted into a middle school during World War II. However, in 2002, the land was bought to make way for a commercial complex. During this time, a nurse by the name of Li Fei claimed that she'd had to treat several construction workers for what were described as bite wounds. The workers recovered, but they were too terrified to return to the site. Later, several blogs described an attack in the area, as a mason attacked his manager with a hammer, claiming that lizards were making him do it. Then, only a month later, a woman living near the building claimed to see a dragon along the arm of one of the construction cranes. And if that wasn't enough, on several forums, employees of a hotel across the street from the building claimed to see ghostly animals leering in the distance. So yes, you could knock on that door. Just make sure you get your hand back. Number 7. The Haunted Ballroom. Now we're talking. This is one I for sure would want to check out. I would definitely moonwalk in a haunted ballroom. The house, if you want to call it that, is a mansion/castle that was built between 1871 and 1887 for a New Zealand politician, William Larnack. Like any other Disney castle, you have about a 3,000 square foot ballroom. Larnack gave his 21-year-old daughter a ballroom for her birthday. Here you go, Kate, now, go make a friend or two. Good luck. What would you want a ballroom for? It's just the worst gift. What happened to ponies? Well, Kate sadly passed away due to typhoid cancer, but the death doesn't get in the way for her. Apparently, the spirit of the youngster is still said to haunt the ballroom. Number 6. Lawang Sewu. Designed by Cosmin Citroën, Lawang Sewu, which translates to 1,000 doors, was the center of operations for the NIS, the first railway company in the Dutch East Indies. The complex is a collection of 4 small buildings and was a fairly beautiful, if nondescript building when the Japanese army invaded in 1942. Under their command, the building was converted into a brutal dungeon where all manners of horrific war crimes were carried out by the Japanese imperialist forces. Retaken by the Indonesian army, the complex fell into disrepair, its white paint beginning to crumble and the facade falling away to a much more sinister disposition. Legends began to circulate of the ghosts of decapitated prisoners searching for their heads, and a vampiric vampiric mother resurrected to prey upon the living, making her nest in the rafters. All of this meant that these 1,000 doors would have trouble opening for any business other than historical preservation. In that case, do you think you'd be willing to knock on one of them? Number 5. Edinburgh Castle. In Scotland's capital city, I've been there a handful of times, and it's one of my favorite places to visit. It's got a nice little castle, this Edinburgh Castle. Of course, you have to visit it every time that you go. It's a real calf workout. Some of these parts are just chilling. You can really feel the haunt in the air. And these rooms date back to more than 900 years, so the walls have seen a few fortnights. Sightings of colonial prisoners from the American Revolutionary War are common, so that's terrifying, as well as French prisoners from the 7 Years' War. If you're thinking about visiting, perhaps the ghost of the wandering dog in the castle's cemetery will convince you to stay a night. Number 4. Leap Castle. Going from Scotland to Ireland, the ancient history of Ireland is steeped in blood, and there's no better place which better exemplifies this than Leap Castle. Constructed between the 13th and 15th centuries, the castle was originally known as Leap of the O'Bannons. Subject to the O'Carroll clan, a number of power struggles were had as various groups attempted to vie for the castle. Two brothers of the O'Carroll clan turned on one another, and in an event that would be known as the Bloody Chapel, one would slay the other in the middle of a service, running him through with a sword in front of their family. Later, it would be passed on to the Darby family. Now, Mildred Darby would frequently hold seances in the castle, leading to the stone walls becoming home to all manners of ghosts, spirits, and worse, a reputation. Some of these ghosts included the Red Lady, who stalked through the halls with a dagger, and two youths, one who fell from the battlements, and the other still looking for her sister. Number 3. Ram Inn. Also doubling as a functioning pub located in England, the inn has been owned and operated by many folks since the 1100s. The ancient Ram Inn has been investigated by years of paranormal researchers. Shows like Ghost Adventures, Most Haunted, you name it. They've all done paranormal research at the ancient Ram Inn. And by research, I mean they just kind of stood around for a bit in the dark and taking notes. I could never do that, and legend has it that the energy from Stonehenge apparently feeds the property's paranormal power. Not to mention, the backyard is also home to a 5,000-year-old pagan burial ground. Stonehenge feeding power, I mean that's one way to save on your electricity bill. Number 2. The Poveglia Island Asylum. Ah, Poveglia, lovely little island just outside of the city of Venice. Well, good luck getting there, because it's completely closed to the public. Fairly unnoticed until 1776, the Maestro alla Sanita took control of the island, using it as a checkpoint for seafaring goods headed to the city proper. If you remember your Euro history class, you probably know where this is going. In 1793, the island was turned into a massive quarantine zone for the bubonic plague. What buildings did remain were then transformed into an asylum for the insane in the 1920s. Apparently, even with a doctor that supposedly experimented on their patients' brains before leaping from the building's tower in 1930, driven mad by the ghosts of his victims. The asylum was open for about 44 years before it was closed in 68. Well, there have been attempts to reopen the island as a park. None have really been successful, but honestly, I think I'd rather just not go trick-or-treating in that neighborhood. It kinda sounds like a rough part of town. Number 1. The Queen Anne Brick Mansion. Heading over to Georgia for this haunted mansion. When I say mansion, I mean Haunting of Hill House type mansion, not quite like a Will Smith mansion. You know, in Savannah's Columbia Square, the Queen Anne Brick Mansion was initially built in 1892 for William and Anne Kehoe and their 10 kids. After a few deaths took place in the house, the building was converted into a bed and breakfast, and since 1992, guests have reported hearing footsteps and sounds of kids playing. I wouldn't want that at a regular bed and breakfast, let alone a haunted one. I would just like to sleep.
Number 10. Molly Brown House. Molly Brown was known for being an explorer and adventurer, and her adventure led her to end up as a passenger on the Titanic. She was one of only a small number who managed to escape the tragedy alive, getting away on lifeboat number 6. She was known as the heroine of the Titanic, as she tried to get their lifeboat lifeboat to turn back and find more survivors, and even got the first-class passengers to donate money to the less fortunate who had lost everything in the event. She then returned to her home in Denver, where she lived for years until she finally passed away in 1932. Brown and her separated husband and mother apparently still remain in the home, haunting it to this day. Visitors say that they can often see the figures of the three in various different rooms throughout the house. Furniture will be moved and rearranged, and this most commonly occurs in the room that used to be their daughter's. The house now serves as a museum, and if you're interested, you can visit it to this day. Number 9. Woodburn Mansion. The Woodburn Mansion is located in Dover, Delaware, and was built back in 1790. It is often known for its purchasing in 1965 to be the residence of the governor, but others know it for its history of ghostly appearances. The first ghost was sighted in the home around 25 years after it was built. The two owners at the time were entertaining a preacher, and when they sat down for dinner, he asked if they shouldn't be waiting for the other guest before they start their meal, but the owners explained that there was no other guest. But the preacher described a man he had seen in the home that matched the exact description of one of the owner's fathers. The ghost of her father had also been seen by other guests over the years. People now say that the ghost of a little girl will also often appear, and if you leave out a glass of wine, it will be drank by the spirits of Revolutionary soldiers. Number 8. Bell Witch Farm. The Bell Witch is known for being one of the most well-documented supernatural stories ever. A woman named Kate Batts was neighbors with John Bell, who lived on the Bell farm. They were feuding neighbors because she believed that he had cheated her out of some land in a deal, and on her deathbed she vowed to haunt the Bell family and farm forever. For the next 3 years, they experienced very strange things happening. They would hear voices speaking into their ears, see strange animals like a dog with a rabbit's head, and John's daughter would even suffer from physical attacks that would leave her unconscious. Eventually, John died, and a vial with a strange liquid was found beside his bed. The Bell Witch was held responsible for his death, marking the first time in history that a death would ever be officially recognized as being caused by the supernatural. Through their website, you can book overnight tours of the property and for some reason also book some river tubing while you're at it. Number 7. The Mackenzie House. The Mackenzie House is located in Toronto and is known for being the home of the city's first ever mayor, William Mackenzie. He moved to the home in 1859 and died only 2 years later, leaving behind his wife and a total of 14 children. The home was empty for a while until renovations began in the 1940s to turn the property into a museum. That was when people started reporting the ghost of the Mackenzie house. It was apparently a long-haired woman who even reportedly slapped a caretaker across the face. There were also many more reports of the ghost of William Mackenzie himself haunting the house, being spotted many different times over the decades. Other reports include a tall, dark figure that watches guests sleep, footsteps creaking through the hall, and the sound of piano music. The house was successfully turned into a museum and is open for anybody to visit. Number 6. LaLaurie House. The LaLaurie House was famously reimagined in American Horror Story Coven, Kathy Bates playing Madame Delphine LaLaurie. The woman was a real-life socialite turned serial killer. She had a chamber in her home where she would dispose of her victims between 1831 and 1834, but responders to a fire would eventually uncover her dark secret. Her victims apparently continue to haunt the property to this day, unable to rest because of how they died tragically. Pedestrians can apparently hear shouting, moaning, and crying coming from the home, some people even saying that they can see faces looking out into the street from the windows. Despite its history, the house has managed to maintain a place on the market, even being owned by Nicolas Cage until 2009, and it's now apparently owned by a wealthy oil tycoon. Number 5. Franklin Castle. Franklin Castle is known as one of the most haunted destinations in Ohio, having been built in 1865 for the Tiedemann family. Over the next few years, various different tragedies would take place. 4 of the family members died, and the father apparently had a hidden passage inside the home where he killed another member of his family and his mistress. Since then, those who have been inside the castle cite various different paranormal experiences and strange occurrences. In the tower window, there is apparently a woman in black who will stand there looking out at passersby. There are also reports of crying children, doors flying off hinges, and lights spinning. You can also apparently hear footsteps inside the home even if you're alone, and if you leave something on a floor or a table, it will be moved to a different spot. Human remains were also once found inside the home in the 1970s, though it was never confirmed whether or not they were real. Number 4. Joshua Ward House. The Joshua Ward House was built in Salem in 1784, Salem being known as one of the most haunted cities in the world due to the witch trials that took place there. The home was built by Joshua Ward on property that was first owned by George Corwin, the High Sheriff of Salem during the trials. He was responsible for all of the deaths that came as a result, and there were even rumors that he would lure those accused of being witches to his home and would inflict cruelty on them before their trial. Many times after a witch was found guilty, George would go to their home and steal their belongings, an action that would eventually end up with him being arrested. After he died, he was buried in the basement of the home, and as a result apparently haunts it to this day. People report the feeling of being choked, apparently by George's spirit, and there are 2 others that haunt the home: Giles Corey, a man who was found guilty as being a warlock, and another unnamed witch. Number 3. The Myrtles Plantation. The Myrtles Plantation in St. Francisville is said to be one of the creepiest places in the South, and is even called one of the most haunted houses in America. The house was built in 1797, and since then apparently dozens of deaths have occurred in a variety of different ways, including illness, poisoning, and attacks. Visitors and those who have lived in the home have reported many strange events taking place within the house. A few of the reported paranormal events include jewelry disappearing, furniture moving on its own, a grand piano playing itself, mysterious handprints, disappearing objects, and seeing former house residents standing behind you in mirrors. In the 70s, when it was purchased by the Myers family, there were numerous reports and even photos of the spirit of a young girl haunting the property. Now it stands as a bed and breakfast, popular with those chasing the paranormal, and you can receive tours late at night. Number 2. The Winchester Mystery House. This one is probably the most popular and well known on this list. The Winchester Mystery House was built in San Jose, California, and is said to be haunted by the ghosts of everyone who was killed by a Winchester weapon. Sarah Winchester lived in the home after the death of her husband, the founder, and was tormented by the spirits of everyone who had died, so she started adding rooms to the home to make room for and confuse the restless spirits. Over time, the home became a labyrinth with many confusing features, including halls to nowhere, cut-off staircases, and sloping floors. The house now apparently has 10,000 windows, 2,000 doors, 47 fireplaces, 40 staircases, 13 bathrooms, and 9 kitchens. Sarah Winchester died in 1922, and the home is now host to tours for anyone who wishes to go in search of evidence of the many ghosts within the walls. Number 1. The Whaley House. In the year 1852, a man named James Robinson, also known as Yankee Jim, was sentenced to death for the crime of grand larceny or theft. Years later, a couple named Thomas and Anna Whaley built a house on the exact spot where Yankee Jim had passed away. As a result, the home apparently became haunted by his restless spirit. His footsteps were apparently able to be heard throughout the house. As years went on, though, more ghosts came to inhabit the property, including Mr. Mr. and Mrs. Whaley after they had passed away, along with their dog. All their ghosts have been reported as being sighted within the home. The sightings and paranormal events apparently became so overwhelming that in the 1960s, the US Commerce Department classed the house as officially haunted. It is now a museum that offers nighttime tours to those who are interested in potentially catching a glimpse of the ghosts.
Starting us off at number 10 is Louisiana Old State Capitol. This neo-Gothic cathedral-like castle was built back in 1846 after the Louisiana legislature decided to relocate the capital away from the sinful lifestyle scattered across New Orleans. For many years it housed some of the most esteemed and prestigious lobbyists and lawmakers, and although it's no longer used for politics, it is far from empty. Said to be haunted by numerous entities like a security guard and a girl who lived nearby during construction, the most notorious is that of Pierre Cuvion. Once a senator in the Capitol's prime, it said Pierre dropped dead from a heart attack in the building after a spirited speech about the corruption of politics. Visitors say his ghost still haunts the halls to this day, and he can often be heard stomping around the Senate floor or playing tricks on the staff. Once while making his nightly rounds, a security guard, an alive one to be clear, not the ghost, said he felt a tap of a cold finger on his shoulder, but when he turned around, nothing was there, but he knew he wasn't imagining it, as afterwards it sounded like something or someone was giggling. Most creepy of all is the numerous reports of staff saying they've seen motion detectors go off only to find an empty room upon inspection. So they would go back and check security tapes, but nothing had entered or left at the time the sensors were triggered. Coincidence? You tell me. Coming in at number 9, the Woodland Plantation. Owned by notorious pirate and seafarer William Johnson, during its active years it was used as a sugar plantation, housing and torturing a multitude of slaves. It likely comes as no surprise that Johnson was not revered as a kind man. Not only did he frequently kill for his job at sea, but he was notoriously cruel to his slaves too, with many reporting he would not bat an eye, executing or beating any who dared question his power or step out of line. Today, those brave enough to visit report hearing the cries of the tortured souls echo through the house, as well as lights turning on and off independently, and unexplainable bursts of cold air even in the blistering heat of summer. Most terrifying though is those that have witnessed the ghost of Pierre Lafleur, a man who briefly lived at the house after its days as a plantation, who after running out of money took to the chandelier in the living room and tragically ended his life. I will not be taking my chances with that one. Next up at number 8 is the USS Kidd. Maybe I just watched too much Pirates of the Caribbean as a kid, but there is something extra scary about a haunted ship. During World War II, this boat was a destroyer ship for the US Navy, named after Admiral Isaac Kidd. Kidd tragically lost his life to the attack on Pearl Harbor, but surprisingly, this isn't where the boat gets its ghost story from. On April 11th, 1945, a Japanese plane committed a attack, plummeting into the boat, killing 38 sailors and leaving 55 others badly wounded. Today it's no longer used as a warship, but remains docked in the Baton Rouge as a war memorial, and all that enter say they've felt spirits of the sailors who lost their lives inside. Visitors claim to see full-bodied apparitions of the spirits decked out in their war uniforms, as well as ghostly arms and legs creepily floating around, looking as if they were brutally ripped from the rest of the body. But whatever you do, just stay away from the sleeping quarters, as that's where things get even worse. Those that have ventured down say the blood-curdling screams of the soldiers can be heard bouncing off the walls, and some even say they've been pushed or grabbed by the tortured souls right up until they step foot off the ship. Coming in at number 7 is Chrétien Point. First run by Hippolyte Chrétien, a French colonist, Chrétien accrued a massive wealth operating his cotton plantation off the backs of slaves. On top of that, Chrétien also had some less than friendly friends, one of which was the famed pirate Jean Lafitte. One day, Chrétien's son, Hippolyte II, fell in love with the neighbor girl Felicity Nada. She was a fiery, passionate, and independent Spanish woman, and despite pushback from his father, Hippolyte married Felicity and the pair remained happily together. Once his father died, Hippolyte took over the family business, but sadly he died of yellow fever shortly after in in 1839, leaving Felicity to keep things running. She took pride in this position and accrued even more wealth than her father-in-law or husband ever had, eventually even becoming friends with the pirate Jean Lafitte herself, just as her father-in-law had. But after Lafitte's death, his crew thought they could pull the wool over Felicity's eyes and steal from her beloved home. But they were no match for the widow. Upon the break-in, she shot a pistol right between the eyebrows of one of the pirates, sending the rest running for their lives. Eventually, Felicity died, but eternally devoted to her plantation, her spirit has never left. Visitors say you can still hear the deadly gunshot clear as day in the hall, as well as the sound of bodies tumbling down the stairs. Just be careful if you do decide to visit. Felicity does not always take kindly to visitors. Next up at number 6 is Labo Mansion. Once the plantation of a wealthy businessman in 1846, in 1905 the property was sold and converted into a hotel and casino. Now at the time, gambling was outlawed in New Orleans, but it became quite the popular hang spot during Prohibition. While patrons were likely pulled in by the promise of booze and gambling, it didn't take long before they realized the building was haunted by dozens of spirits. Partygoers often complained their watches immediately stopped working the minute they stepped foot on the property, only to magically be good as new once they left. Many claimed to hear strange noises echo through the halls, and others nearly fainted seeing the woman in white who sat on the upstairs porch. Then in 2013, a group of so-called paranormal investigators that by the sound of it were more like a group of drunken idiots, snuck onto the property looking to catch one of the many rumored entities said to haunt the historic halls. But having no real clue what they were doing, decided to light fire on the building in an attempt to provoke the spirits to show themselves. Sadly, all they did was burn it down. However, the fire was no match for the spirits. Even without the walls to hold them in, all the entities remain haunting the property. Those that walk by say their watches still stop working the minute they step foot on the property, and sometimes at night you can hear the cries of the terrifying woman in white. Next up at number 5 is Lloyd Hall Plantation. After leaving his London family for a new life in America, William Lloyd built his plantation in 1820. It's rumored that Lloyd was actually exiled from his family's insurance dynasty, hence his sudden move to America, but no one actually knows for sure. Like all plantations of the time, it was a cruel and brutal place for the slaves, but the owner was swimming in money and profit. That was, however, until the Civil War, when it was discovered that Lloyd was working as a double spy for both the Union and Confederacy. Once word got out, Union soldiers stormed his house and tarred and feathered him before he was hanged for his disloyalty. It's said Lloyd now haunts the house along with the many slaves that died while under his care. But that's not all. Others reported a Union soldier named Harry who was shot while hiding in the attic, as well as Lloyd's niece who, after being left at the altar, jumped out the second-story window to her death. Those brave enough to step on the property claimed to hear piano and violins despite no one playing, ringing doorbells when no one is outside, and see furniture moving around all on its own. Some say that if you listen carefully, you can still hear the screams of William Lloyd echo across the property. Coming in at number 4, Huma's house. By this point, I am sure you have put together that there were a lot of plantations in Louisiana during the early 1800s. Among that list is Huma's house. Said to be haunted by countless spirits of tortured souls from its time as a plantation, the ghosts that live here are sure to send you running for the hills. Among them are 16 souls said to be trapped inside oak trees across the property. All the souls trapped inside lost their lives during a dangerous construction project gone wrong. The trees were a cherished entity to the house, but workers cut down many of the historic oak trees before sending them down the river to be milled. There were 16 profiteers set off aboard the backs of the big tree trunks, but somehow their bodies were never recovered. It's said they remained trapped inside the trees as punishment, stuck on the property they tried to cheat. Among the haunted trees is a mysterious girl in a blue dress, often seen staring at visitors while she remains perched at the top of a staircase, but in the blink of an eye she'll disappear into thin air. And if a creepy girl apparition and Harry Potter trees don't scare you, then just wait until you feel the hand of a cold spirit grab your shoulder. You will never want to return as long as you live. Coming in at number 3, Taylortown Tower. Once a booming church amongst the community, shortly after its opening in 1906, membership began declining at a rapid rate, and soon the church became abandoned and used for hay storage for the nearby farmers. But how did it go from a church into a bell tower? Well, as the legend goes, a local plantation owner's daughter was engaged to be married, but on the day of her wedding, the groom couldn't go through with it and disappeared without a trace. The bride was absolutely devastated, and in a fit of depression ran to the nearby abandoned tower to end her suffering. It's said the bride jumped from the top of the tower to her death, and her father was so distraught when he happened upon her body that he burned the church down. In a cruel twist of fate, all that survived the flames was the very tower she had jumped from, taunting him until his dying day. Locals say that when there is a full moon, the bride can be seen wandering the land looking for her loved one, screaming and crying out after him. Next up at number 2 is the Bourbon Orleans Hotel. Back in the day, the Bourbon was a highly frequented theater and ballroom where wealthy Creole men could sneak away from their wives to secretly engage in erotic nighttime affairs. But all the fun came to a screeching halt in 1816 when a fire took out most of the building. Fast forward to 1881 and the building was put up for sale and purchased by a community of nuns. But after a brutal yellow fever epidemic struck Louisiana, many nuns and orphans' lives were lost, and that is where the ghost stories begin. Today the building operates as one of New Orleans' most luxurious hotels, but make no mistake, it is haunted by at least 20 different terrifying spirits. Guests have reported the sounds of laughter in the halls when no one was around, and some swear to have seen young people lying in beds with mists of black fog hanging over them. But most terrifying is the ghost who resides in room 644. Rumor has it that during its time as a monastery, a nun took her own life in this very room. Those that have stayed reported hearing blood-curdling screams from the room at all hours of the day, and any guests brave enough to sleep the night were awoken by the nun staring at them over the bed. So if you're looking to be haunted by a creepy nun on your vacation, be my guest, but I'll be looking for different accommodation. And last up today in our number 1 spot is La Pavilion Hotel. Just minutes away from the notorious French Quarter lies the luxurious Pavilion Hotel. But despite its lavish exterior, it is believed to be the home to over 100 spirits, and some paranormal investigators even believe the building sits on top of a portal to the other side. An interesting theory considering the building's less than ideal history. Although today the area is a tourist hotspot, back in the 19th century, the ground where La Pavilion sits was deemed completely inhospitable and incredibly dangerous. It was the frequent spot for foul deeds and late night killings, which is likely why so many spirits reside in the hotel's 4 walls. Among the most talked about are a couple seen dressed in beautiful clothing roaming around with googly eyes. The couple will enter an elevator, but then it never goes anywhere. Instead, the usual ping sound rings loudly, and the doors open up again, revealing no one inside. Many also claim to have witnessed a young woman on the 9th floor, reported to have died on the steps of the hotel. But the truly terrifying entity only reveals herself at night. One guest staying on the most notoriously haunted 9th floor said that in the middle of the night he was woken by a woman dressed in all black, sitting at the foot of his bed. He was speechless and terrified and went to scream, but the entity leaned in, ran her icy cold fingers through his hair, and said, quote, "You belong to me, I'll never let you go." Needless to say, he never returned, and I do not blame him. If I ever saw that lady in my room, I would be running as fast as I could.
We have this little house that's located on Holland Island in Maryland, USA. This island used to be the home to about 360 residents who were watermen and farmers. But now, for obvious reasons, the island has been abandoned. The harsh winds and tides forced the residents to live on the mainland, but this house is the last survivor. I really hope that only the pelicans are living here because this looks like it would be pretty close to collapsing. I don't know how it managed to survive all of these years because it looks like it needs some serious TLC. And if one big wave comes crashing into it, the whole house is just a goner. A rickety little house takes us into number 9. The little house is known as a tea house built too high. And this little guy is located in Nagano, Japan. This tea house was built on top of 2 chestnut trees that were cut down from a nearby mountain, and then it was transported into this area. The architect decided to build this house for his own personal use. It only has 1 room, and the only way inside of the house is by using a freestanding ladder propped up against one of the trees. I mean, yeah, sounds legit. You would think that the architect would have made some permanent stairs or something, but then on the other hand, maybe he's not a good architect, if he's even an architect. What if the wind blows away your ladder? How the heck are you supposed to get down? But can we also take a look at these 2 little trees that are holding up this house? Hopefully he doesn't have a lot of furniture, or even, you know, throws big parties. Hopefully he doesn't have a lot of friends, because it doesn't look like this thing can hold a lot of weight. Little House on a Rock comes into number 8. Yeah, I think this little house looks pretty cool, but would I want to stay there? Probably not. I feel like any wind speed over 5 kilometers an hour would totally destroy this house. And what if I had some sort of, you know, medical emergency? Nobody would be able to come help. I'd like to say, yeah, hi, I'm a little tiny house on a rock in the middle of the lake. Can you please help me? And they'll be like, how do we help you? At least you wouldn't have to deal with awful neighbors. You don't have any. I guess that's one of the few perks with this tiny little house on this rock. Number 7 takes us over to Russia. This was a little wooden house that was built by a Russian businessman, and it took him 15 years to build. This house used to be known as Russia's highest wooden house, but I guess the guy who built this house didn't see one huge problem with the materials that he was using. Yeah, there's a reason why houses aren't made purely out of wood. First of all, this house is a termite's dream. Second of all, this house is highly flammable. I hope this house didn't have a kitchen, because it would be a highly stressful thing if you were to burn, you know, some toast. And as it turns out, back in 2008, the house was condemned as a fire hazard, so a lot of it was pulled down by local government, and then the remaining structure burned to the ground in 2012. Traveling number 6, we have the Minotaura Monasteries. And this is located in Greece. These buildings were built on top of natural rock pillars during the 15th century. There used to be 24 monasteries, but now only 6 of them are being used today. But back in the day, people could only reach the steep cliffs in a hanging basket or by climbing a flimsy rope ladder. Yeah, no thanks. I don't think I would stuff myself into a little basket and hope that the wind doesn't knock me over on my way up. Thankfully today, these monasteries can be reached by roads, steps, and bridges. The cliff house brings us to number 5. I've never had the desire to live on a frickin' cliff. Nothing good ever comes from being too close to a cliff, so I don't know why an architect would ever want to build this house. Obviously this house isn't real, but could you imagine if it was? I would need a way taller fence and probably a good life insurance policy, you know, to want to live there. Just looking at this picture, it gives me real anxiety. I live in a condo and I struggle with bringing in my groceries, but if you lived over there, I mean, you would literally need to drive up a mountain and carry your groceries through a cave just to get to your kitchen. So I guess I'll stop complaining now, because there are people in worse off situations. The houses that defy gravity takes us to number 4. I'm already scared of those apartment buildings that have those floating balconies. I don't think I can ever get on board with these houses that look like that they're not supported at all. I don't even think that I would want a house on the ground floor, because I would be way too scared that my neighbors would fall onto my house. Why can't we just build normal looking houses that are all structurally sound and well supported? Sky lodges brings us to number 3. I'll be the first one to admit that these sky lodges, they look super sick, but you'll never see me in one of those, and you know what? I'll tell you why. In order to get your suite, first you must hike up a 400-meter cliff or hike through an intense trail with the zip lines. Each of these sky lodges measures in about 24 feet in length and 8 feet in height. But you know what? Don't worry. Safety is apparently their #1 priority, so that's why they made an exit portal located in the upper part of your pod. Okay, cool, but if I have to escape my pod, am I forced to sit at the top of this thing? Because it seems pretty dangerous and not something that I would want to ever do. And now, bringing us to number 2, we have this scary looking thing. Do you guys see that little rickety gondola that you would have to take to get into your house? No thanks. I'm pretty good on this one. I'm pretty good with passing. And what's up with the little tiny rock feet holding up this whole thing? What, they couldn't find a sturdier rock chunk out there? I mean, that's not the best piece. Everything at the top looks legit, and then as you travel down, things just get worse. I'll be the first one to say that I think this house is a terrible idea. No one needs to live on the top of a shady looking rock. Here's another cliff house hanging in at number 1. These extremely risky houses are located in Tibet, and it makes me wonder if Tibet is running out of land space. Because why the hell would you want to build a little tiny home on a rickety cliffside where the rocks can plummet at any moment? I can appreciate that they tried to provide these homes with some sort of structure, but you will never see me step foot inside of one of these homes. They look like they're being anchored with just a few posts each. And this is probably how to get into your house. All jokes aside, I hope that an architect inspects the integrity of these homes at least once a week, because I'm seriously stressed out for the people that live there. Well, starting off at number 10, the Shanghai tunnels in Portland, Oregon. Portland was one of the most dangerous ports in the United States during the early 19th century, and it was the epicenter of Shanghai, a form of human trafficking. It's crazy to think human trafficking still happens today, and tunnels are still the way to do it. According to the local lore, swindlers preyed upon unsuspected men in the local salons, which were often outfitted with trapdoors that deposited the victims directly into a network of underground tunnels. These men were supposedly held captive, drugged, and eventually transported to the waterfront, where they were sold to ships as unpaid laborers, aka slaves. Some worked for several years before finding their way back home. The tunnels are said to be haunted by the aggrieved spirits of the captives who died in the dark recesses behind the city. Random facts: the practice of kidnapping men to work on ships came to be known as Shanghai because the ships that were sold to were often headed to East Asia. Number 9, Eastern State Penitentiary, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The castle-like Eastern State Penitentiary took solitary confinement to whole new levels when it was built in 1829. Prisoners lived alone, exercised alone, and ate alone. When inmates were left in a cell, a guard would cover his head with a hood so he wouldn't be seen. The prison had to abandon its solitary confinement system due to overcrowding from 1913 until it was closed in 1970. Although the forms of punishment did not get any less severe, I mean, chaining an inmate's tongue to his wrists, that's just one example, a true story. The site's one of most haunted places in America right now. Well, it welcomes thousands of visitors every year, both for its museums and annual Terror Behind the Wall celebration, which features 6 haunted attractions within the prison walls for Halloween. I mean, when you talk about an attraction inside of a prison, no thanks. Well, it was reported paranormal happenings have included dismembered laughter, shadowy figures, and pacing of footsteps. Sorry, I thought I was hearing footsteps behind me right now. Okay, I'm pretty freaked out with this one, so let's move on to the next one. So next up, number 8, we have House of the Seven Gables, Salem, Massachusetts. Now, this house did not steal its name from the classic novel. In fact, it inspired the novel itself. Salem is known for its history of the famous witch trials, and that's where Sabrina Spellman lived. But it happens to be the birthplace of Nathaniel Hawthorne, who used this 17th century house as inspiration for his famous 1851 novel, The House of the Seven Gables. Aside from its beautiful yet spooky facade, the house is surrounded by paranormal activity and ghost sightings, all based on personal experiences of staff. Every October, the house offers spooky tours as well as weekly performances of 2 plays. The Legacy of the Hanging Judge and Spirit of the Gables. Would you guys see a play in a haunted town's haunted house? Coming in hot at number 7 on this list, the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park. If you've read or seen The Shining, you know the feeling of this often snowbound hotel. It's the location Stephen King based his Overlook Hotel upon. It may not look like the film unless you watch the 1990s made-for-TV movie version, which, yeah, I don't think anyone has. I mean, just walking to your room can drain you. So one stiff drink might have you seeing ghosts, or a couple kids chanting, "Red rum, red rum." Number 6, we're bringing you Red Onion Saloon, Skagway, Alaska, established in 1898. As a brothel for miners during the Klondike Gold Rush, Alaska's Red Onion Saloon, it had a feature that set it apart from other bordellos. It used dolls to help run its business, always a good sign, right? Well, every day 10 dolls would be placed on the bar downstairs, each one representing one of the ladies working in the upstairs room. A customer would choose one of the dolls, at which point it would lay down on the bar to indicate that particular workers were occupied. When the customers came back downstairs, the doll would be returned to her sitting position to let other potential clients know that she was available. Well, fast forward to 2019, when the Red Onion Saloon still operates as a bar and restaurant, yet the dolls are still on display, and it offers tours of the upstairs rooms, which are preserved as sort of like a mix-shaped brothel museum. As if these dolls weren't creepy enough, there were reports of Lydia, a former madame of a brothel, haunting the site, complete with cold spots and lingering spells of perfume rafting through the walls. I mean, all creepiness aside, I'm more curious about how this place got named Red Onion. I mean, they could have came up with any other name. Well, let me know what you guys would call this in the comment section below. Give me a name. Alright, we're halfway on this list. Number 5, we got RMS Queen Mary in Long Beach, California. This retired ocean liner sailed the Atlantic Ocean from 1936 to 1967. During the first 3 years at sea, the Queen Mary carried Hollywood celebrities like Elizabeth Taylor. Her days as a luxurious ship were short-lived. In 1939, she was stripped of her amenities and began her second life as a Grey Ghost, a World War II troop ship. At the conclusion of the war, she was restored to her former glory and traversed the Atlantic for nearly 2 more decades. On Halloween 1967, the Queen Mary departed on her last cruise, eventually docking in Long Beach, California, her final resting place. The ship is reportedly haunted by the spirits of those who died aboard, such as the young sailor who was crushed to death by a door in the engine room and a crew member who was murdered in cabin B340. Number 4, Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast in Fall River. So this location came up on nearly every search on our quest to find this top 10 list for you guys. Well, you've likely heard of the children's rhyme Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave it to her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. Well, you can not only visit the scene of that famous 1892 double homicide, you can also sleep at the Borden's home, eat their last meal, Johnny cakes, a thick cornmeal pancakes and eggs, in case you were wondering, and spend the last nights in the bedroom where the bodies of Lizzie's stepmother Abigail was found. Someone who stayed there said, "I can attest, this home painstakingly furnished to look exactly as it did on the morning of the murders." Well, that will creep you right out. Better though, the 175-year-old property hosts up to 20 overnight guests, in which some of them, for some reason, it's a tradition when you go to this place, they will actually whip out a Ouija board. I mean, I'm not down for Ouija. That is a real life situation that can happen, and let alone whipping out a Ouija board in a haunted place. Finally, down to number 3 on this list, we have Crescent Hotel, Erica Springs, Arkansas. Since its construction in 1886, the Crescent Hotel has served several purposes: luxury resorts, conservatory for young women, junior college. But the strangest mark on its history came in 1937 when it got a new owner, Norman G. Baker. Baker was a millionaire inventor who decided to pose as a doctor despite having no medical training, and turned the hotel into a hospital that can cure cancer. Well, he was eventually found out and he was ran out of town, although reports say that his spirits found its way back to the site and found some otherworldly company too. The now operating Crescent Hotel is said to be haunted by at least 8 ghosts, ranging from a 5-year-old girl to a bearded man wearing Victorian clothing. 1 ghost is enough for me, never mind 8 of them, and children ghosts, I think those were the absolute scariest kind. And number 1, we have Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, Western West Virginia. This 4-botting asylum began construction in 1858 and opened to patients in 1864. The massive structure was designed by architect Richard Andrews to maximize sunlight and fresh air fire, it was believed that the building itself would serve as a healing environment. It was designed for 250 people housed and 2,400 patients in crowded conditions. I mean, that's a pretty big range going from 250 to 2,400. Patients were physically restrained and often given inhumane treatments such as the electroshock therapy and lobotomies, which was very popular back in the day. After more than a century in operation, the facility was forced to close in 1994, which when you think about it wasn't too long ago, within the last 30 years. And it was due to the reforms in mental health and treatment and the deterioration of the building. Hundreds of patients died during the asylum tenure, and scores of guests and ghost hunters have claimed they're seeing shadowy figures roaming around the facility.